thing. But anyway, they got to Fort Pitt. William Murray was appointed the commandant, and James Rumsey was stationed there. The British captured the fort, the French fort, on the Mississippi River in Illinois. They tried to send troops from New Orleans up the river to take possession of it under Major Farmer, but they couldn't get only past New Orleans when the Indians, still friendly with the French, waylaid them, and they had to go back. So General Gage, the leading general in the colonies, ordered Fort Pitt to send a detachment down the Illinois River and take possession of Fort Chartres. Captain Sterling was appointed, and 100 men were picked. Rumsey was picked the second man in command to go to Illinois because mainly he could speak French. Remember, he had a good education. So this is the next part of Rumsey's life, going to Illinois and relieving Fort Pitt. He made a list of all, him and Captain Sterling accepted the possession of Fort Pitt, and Rumsey wrote letters back listing all the material that was accepted in there. It is very interesting. While he was there going back, there was a mercantile company in Pennsylvania called Borington, Wharton, and Morgan. And Morgan, the youngest member, met Rumsey. They wanted to get in on the selling the merchandise to the troops there. So he talked to Rumsey, and Rumsey was in desperate straits. He's getting letters from his father saying, I'm broke, I'm desperate, had to sell the business. I still have kids at home, a lot of kids at home, which preyed on Rumsey's mind. So Rumsey decided to take George Morgan's offer to become the agent for the mercantile company. For 9 years, he was living and stationed as an agent in Illinois, which is very interesting, and that's you could call that up, or that's on the internet. But anyway, the money that Morgan promised him he was going to make on the trade didn't work out, and Rumsey became disillusioned. So when the fur trade started to dissipate, the mercantile company wanted to liquidate and get out. They told Rumsey to liquidate and hold the money. Rumsey was so bitter about not making money to help his father, he absconded in the early spring of 1774 with the money. By the way, he got married. He married a Jane McIntyre, the daughter of Martha McIntyre, who married William Murray, the captain who became a major. And they came into the Illinois as the agents of the Frank Mercantile Company. So anyway, there are a lot of spin-off stories of this. I'm getting to how Rumsey gets down to them. So Rumsey takes the money and his family of 3 children, Lacey, Anna Marie Williams, and Susanna. That's in this. That's his family, and that's a chart. And he goes down to New Orleans. He stops in Natchez along the way. He gets a British 1,000-acre grant, and he sells it. So he's loaded with money, and he gets to New Orleans, but he had decided to go into experiment with steam to propel a boat. His friend and father-in-law, William Murray, was then assistant to Oliver Pollock, and they were very important to Governor Galvez in New Orleans. They told him, look, you want to start experiment, go across the lake to Bayou Lacombe. The man just died, Jacques Michael Hertel Rouville, and his widow and a daughter moved into New Orleans. And that's what I'm going to get to in a minute, about the land that Rumsay started his experiment. The land that he started his experiments with, he accepted. And he went over there in 1774, and started to experiment. What land was he on? He was on land that history goes back to 1743. Remember I said doing research history leads to other stories. Anyway, the new governor, Bienville, was recalled back to Paris. The new governor was Pierre Rigaud Vaudreuil. And the first thing he did when he came over to Louisiana as a governor is to grant himself a large plantation on the North Shore, 4,800 arpents. This is a map where it shows where it was located and where Rumsay started his experiment. So Rumsay went across the lake Rumsay, by the way, owned this, will become owner later on. That's part of the story. But Rumsay started his experiments by getting permission from the widow through Oliver Pollock and his father-in-law, and he takes his wife, 3 children, and 2 slaves over there, and he starts doing the experiments. For a year and a half, everything was going good. He decides to buy the land with that money he had found it with. He bought it. But soon after he bought it, remember, that was British territory. New Orleans was in Spanish territory. They were 2 different. Louisiana wasn't there yet, the state. But anyway, that was British territory, and Peter Chester, the governor, just gave Francois Cousin, who was living on Bayou Liberty near Slidell, and he had a bricklaying company and a lumber company, 600 acres right north on Bayou Lacombe of where Rumsay was working. Rumsay was paranoid with secrecy. Why paranoid with secrecy? Because in those days it was completely different. There was no patent laws. And if you started something and somebody found out about it, they could claim that they would. So Rumsay was paranoid with secrecy. And anyway, because here comes Francois Cousin and his company with 6 boats that pass his property where he was doing the experiment every day. So Rumsay decides to move, and he moves to Pearl Island. And Pearl Island, he was a year and a half at Bayou Lacombe, and he was 3.5 years at Pearl Island. How do we know he is at Pearl Island? Because of this book by William Bertrand, the botanist from Pennsylvania. He was touring the South. Simon Farr was taken in from Mobile to the Lake Pontchartrain and the river. He got sick, very sick. Simon Farr had a British land grant up the Pearl River. He took him to his place, but Bertrand was getting sicker. Simon says, look, there's a man on Pearl Island by the name of Rumsay that has some medicine. I'm going to take you there. So in 1776, he takes William Bertrand to Pearl Island, and Rumsay welcomes him. It's in the book, in the chapter. For a month, he lived with Rumsay, and Rumsay treated him. But he, as a very keen botanist and observer, could not figure out what Rumsay was doing on Pearl Island, even after living in his house. So that's how secret Rumsay was. But Rumsay was on Pearl Island until the war broke out. But before the war broke out, Oliver Pollock became an agent for the colony and down south. When he got his letters of appointment, he appointed James Rumsey as captain of engineers. And even though Rumsey was busy, and Pollock was very, very interested as a merchant and owner of ships of what Rumsey was doing, Rumsey had to do something he was involved in the American Revolution. When James Willing brought his raiders down, 1778, he appointed Rumsey led one of the raiders to the North Shore, destroying the British Loyalist plantation. So when Galvez found out that Spain was going to go to war against Britain, Rumsey had to get out. He was a marked man. If they'd have caught him, they'd have shot him. So Oliver Pollock and his father-in-law, said, write to Galvez and tell him that you want to go fight up in the colonies. You're a captain. So he wrote the letter to Galvez, and Galvez, who was gathering his army up, let him go. How he got out a month before the war started? Oliver Pollock's boat. He got on his boat, but I think this is the time he split with his wife. Rumsey had not only the secrets of the experiment boats, he had personal secrets he wanted to keep quiet. He didn't want known that he absconded with that money. He didn't want to know that he left his wife and 2 children, and he got married in Baltimore soon after without getting a divorce. So he was very secretive about when he started experimenting with the boat, and he never told anybody in the history of his last 12 years. He always, and the letters that he wrote, he did contact his wife once he got up to Baltimore, asking what happened to the great iron pot that he brought to New Orleans to the Burgess Ironworks to make a cutoff valve for. I don't know what she answered or anything, but she probably had enough of Rumsey out in the woods and everything with the kid. But when Rumsey left, he took one of his daughters with him, Suki. And his wife, Jane McIntyre, stayed in New Orleans where her mother was and her father-in-law. They later moved to Mississippi and died up around Natchez. That's another story. But now we got Rumsey leaving New Orleans after he was 5 years in Louisiana, starting his experiments. So the land that he started the experiments was first the plantation of Pierre Regard Vaudreuil. They kept it for 10 years. He married a 15-year-old woman. She had a great-grandniece called Marie Joseph Salmonade, and she married a man called Jacques Michael Hertel Rouville, military family from Canada. And they came down to New Orleans and lived in New Orleans. When Vaudreuil left with his 15-year-old wife for France, they donated that 4,800 acres to Rouville, and you can see Rouville's name's on where Rumsey started on the road there. But Rouville and his wife, Marie Joseph Salmonade, kept the property for 22 years. And he was involved in the American Revolution by going back to Canada, and he was from a noble family. That's a different story. But anyway, Rumsey left Bayou-Lacombe, went to Pearl Island, got out of New Orleans when the American Revolution started, showed up in Baltimore in 1780. The last 12 years of his life, from 1780 to 1792 when he died, in 1787 on the Potomac River, he was successful in his demonstration of a successful steamboat to large crowds. He also, before he was successful, he worked for George Washington. And George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson are part of his life, and that's why I put these books here. It's an interesting story of how Washington was involved with he met Rumsay when Rumsay was moved down to Bath, up the river to Bath, and he went in partnership with a Throckmorton to have a bed and breakfast house. Washington stayed there on his way up the river to look at his land, and Rumsay took him in the back in the shed and showed him what he was doing with a boat. He didn't tell him steam. It was a paddle boat. Washington thought he was such a genius that he hired him as his first chief engineer to build canals around the Shenandoah Falls to get to his 50,000 acres. But anyway, Rumsay was successful. How was he successful? First of all, they had a big problem. He got involved with Fitch, John Fitch, who was also researching the steamboat. But he never mentioned that he said he started earlier than Fitch in 1784. He never mentioned about New Orleans, Bayou-Lacombe, or that, because he'd have to tell him also the bad things about him, leaving his wife and getting married again. Okay. But anyway, the problem was both Fitch and Rumsay was stumped with the boiler. The boiler was a giant iron pot that held 500 gallons of water. And it was so cumbersome and didn't give the steam. They were stuck. But Fitch took on a partner, a little man called Henry Voigt, a German watchmaker, and they were working on it. Henry Voigt, both of them went to the American Philosophical Society for help, because that was the only place to find scientific people that could help them. Some of them were back from England who worked on Watt's steam engine. But anyway, Rumsay went up there trying to find out how this man, John Norton, who was an ex-worker for James Watney's steam engine, any information he could give to help with the boiler. He said, no, but I'll keep my eyes open. Here comes later Fitch and his assistant, Henry Voigt, and they bring their papers in, and Henry says, oh, I think I got an idea of a better boiler with pipes. But they didn't do anything about it. The man that they contacted and the society said, don't do anything, because he was in contact with Rumsay. So they continued with their big iron pipe. The man contacts Rumsay, and Rumsay, who left Louisiana with the papers for his 4,800 acres, but it was no good. It was void now, because he left, he abandoned it. Goes to see this man, and he says, look, try making it with iron pipe. right away Rumsay could see the answer. And Rumsay built the boiler, an iron pipe boiler. And within a year and a half, that was a ticket. So the American Philosophical... By the way, William Bartran, who was at Rumsay's house on Pearl Island, was part of the committee of the American Philosophical Society, who formed the Rumsay Society. So we have it in there. So Rumsay completes his steamboat. He perfected with the pipe boiler the solution to the problem. And it's all in the history book. But what he did to demonstrate, he had his brother-in-law, John Barnes, help build the boat and get the machinery ready. And then he said he was going to do a demonstration on December the 3rd, 1787. People, a large crowd gathered on the shore. He took on about 5 women on the boat and only 2 men. One was his Morrow, his brother-in-law, to help drive the boat. But anyway, he started off and started the engines up, and there was a ex-general that was watching, said, "My God, she moves." So it started moving up the river, and it passed that at 4 miles an hour. And he went up a mile or so and made a turn and came back again. And it really impressed the people. But he didn't have a cutoff valve. So for 2 hours, he was going around, back and forth, going up and down until the gas ran out. But the pipe boiler was the key to it. It was not only smaller, but lighter, but only used a few pints of water to make the more pressure. The gallon, they still have one of his gallon kettles. I wrote up there and told them that what Rumsay did down here in New Orleans, you should check my collection in Sims Library, because it has a lot of information on it, on Rumsay and other stories of how I got involved in this. But yes, Rumsay's demonstration was the high point. Not only was, after that, he wrote Washington and he said it's a success. Washington urged him to get to England and get a patent made. And Benjamin Franklin, who was involved with it too, said, "We'll start a society and raise money here." So he gets on a boat in May of 1788 and he goes to London. He goes to England. But I found a letter. The first stop he made was to see his father. His father was still alive then, with 2 kids still in the home. Rumsay had brought 4 of them earlier, right after the war, over to 4 of his half-brothers and sisters. But then Rumsay didn't know it, but that was in the end of 1788. In early 1789, in March, his father died. Rumsay was writing a letter back to Morrow, Charles Morrow, his brother-in-law, and he didn't know it at the time. He says, "Oh, I stopped to see my father. He's doing very well now with the mill, and he still has 2 kids." He didn't know that his father was died. So, yeah, there's a lot more. The story is so big that I just hit the high points. I wanted to know, why do we have a distortion on one of the most important events? And also, Rumsay leads into the American Revolution. And also, not only that, the land that he bought, that he purchased, who started off as a plantation that Vaudreuil gave himself, and then passed it on to his wife's niece and Jacques Rouvel, her husband. Then Rumsay, after he died, Rumsay bought the land, and he used the land to solve the problem. Nancarrow, John Nancarrow is the man's name who was the member of the American Philosophical Society who told Rumsay about the pot boiler. So Rumsay bribed him by giving him the papers to 4,800 acres. But the man tried to get it. He bought him a steam machine down here, John Nancarrow, in 1801 for a sawmill. But the land at the time was American territory, not British territory. Right. But then when it became American territory, he applied, and I have it in my book on Barry Lacombe, and he gave the exact measurements of the land that Rumsay bought. So my solution is, where did he get that? Applying that 10 years later, he kept those papers. The governors gave him a land grant in northern Louisiana, but John Nancarrow is the key who told Rumsay about the pipe boiler that Henry Voigt, the little watchmaker, thought up, and that was the key to solve the history of the successful steamboat. Rumsay spent 4 years there, and he died of a stroke. He saw his father right after he got there. He set him up in a mill business. He started to build his boat in Dover. He met Jefferson in France as the minister of France. And Jefferson loaned him his carriage in England from Dover to get around. So but anyway, he died of a stroke December the 23rd in 1792 and is buried over there. So here we have the distortion of Rumsay being born in Maryland, which was not correct, and I told you where he was born. And here we find out the first 37 years of his life, which was hidden. We brought that to life. And this, to me, I'm sorry that I had to do it this way. This was Rumsay, the picture of Rumsay of Peyton, and this is where James Rumsey started his first experiments with steam in Louisiana, which became very important. And with that, I know it's very crude, but I wanted to let you know of how Rumsay got from Bristol, England, and why he got there, and how he got down to Louisiana. We've been at it for a pretty long time, and I think I ought to stop. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and this concludes all the research I did on James Rumsey. Thank you so much, and God bless you.